Fabulous. So a second warm welcome to the LWN's Councils for this Millennium campaign launch. We are extremely excited to be welcoming not just a brilliant array of speakers tonight, but also so many of you, whether you are current councillors, former councillors, possible future councillors, or whether you are just somebody within the Labour movement who firmly believes that a strong, diverse and inclusive local government sector is to everybody's betterment and wants to help us go around identifying ways to get people to share their power. You are all warmly welcome. You're warmly welcome whether you are new to Labour Women's Network and this is your first event, or whether you are a seasoned LWN member and activist. It is fabulous to see you all. This event came about in November in the Community Union Strategy Room, where we were holding our annual executive committee away weekend, where we try to take a step back from the day-to-day training campaigning work that we are always very busy with.
I'm just kind of half listening. It's more about showing.
And to really step back and ask what are the problems in the Labour movement and what are we trying to address. And our executive committee identified that we have made more rapid progress in Parliament and against some of the cultural things we are trying to achieve as a movement, but local government remains stuck, if not actually in some cases going backwards in terms of both representation and the experience that women have in public life or trying to get into public life at that level. So we really wanted to come, we'd previously done a very successful campaign to make Labour's selection process for Parliament shorter and cheaper. And we wanted to argue that there was an analogue system that needed to be fit for a digital age. So we called it our Selections for this Millennium campaign, which many of you supported, and it was very successful. So taking that branding and applying it to local government, we are really keen to call this campaign Councils for this Millennium, because we really do feel that aspects of local government have had huge progress in the past couple of decades, perhaps, and some of them less notable progress since maybe 60s, 70s, 80s. So we want to turbocharge the race towards diversity inclusion being reality and not fantasy for councillors and people working across regional level government too. And it's so important. We didn't launch this campaign until June because obviously the priority was to do really well for those fighting local elections in May, and huge congratulations to all of you who put yourselves forward to stand, whether you were successful or not. And huge congratulations to everybody who contributed to Labour coming out as the largest party in local government, which is fantastic news. But it is not sadly accompanied by fantastic news on the women's representation front. We have actually managed to go backwards. They say you can't take progress for granted, but we've actually managed to go backwards from 30% of Labour's council leaders being women to 25 after the latest round of AGMs. Yet nobody's really picked up on that, the media, the rest of the Labour movement. So I don't think that's okay. I'm sure many of you won't think that's okay. We often talk about snail's progress, but rapid backward progress is a whole other level, unfortunately. Can I just ask you to stay muted, sisters, so that everybody can hear without difficulty? Thank you very much. So we won't put up with that, and we will be prodding to make sure that everybody who is responsible for making sure women's leadership goes forwards, not backwards, is doing everything that they can. But moreover, we're really conscious that our women members who are in local government are reporting huge numbers of incidences of inter-Labour group bullying, of unacceptable levels of digital harassment, and of things like a damaging wait your turn culture when it comes to succession planning. So in order to advance yourself in a council, you have to, wait for a shoulder tap from a man who is already in an existing position of power. And these are the sorts of challenges we want to discuss tonight, but not in the context of a moan fest. We as ever, want to be agents of positive change making. So we're asking things like, what are the manifesto commitments we can call on from the next Labour government to supercharge progress? And what are the practical tips that Labour groups and other parts within the Labour movement can pick up and distribute in order to improve our cultures and make things better? We, of course, encourage sisterly use of social media, and the hashtag for tonight's event is hashtag councils for the number 4, this millennium, 2 L's, 2 T, 2 N's, 2 L's. So hashtag councils for this millennium. And by all means, also comment in the comments in the chat function on the Zoom in a comradely way. You can also pop questions in there, which we'll pick up later on, or you can raise your hand and ask those a little bit later on once we've heard from our panel. So I am super excited to welcome our guests tonight, who I think represent a wonderful cross-section of leading women within the Labour movement. We will hear first from Councillor Tafheen Sharif, who is the first ever Muslim and indeed ethnic minority mayor of my own borough in Tameside in Greater Manchester, and is also a parent of 4 young children, most of whom, if not all of whom, Taff, I think you had within your term of office as a councillor, which is pretty challenging. Vaguely remember being there myself. And we will then hear from the wonderful Sharon Thompson, who is the newly appointed Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council, the biggest local authority in Europe. So congratulations for that, Sharon, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. We will then, House of Lords votes permitting, hear from the fabulous Baroness Sue Hayman, who of course has had a career in both Houses of Parliament and in the shadow cabinet, but is in between votes currently in the Lords. So if you hear a division bell going and Sue briefly disappears, we will work with that and bring her back to you as soon as we can. We will then hear from the newly appointed chair of the Local Government Association, Councillor Anntoinette Bramble, who is also a Labour Women's Network trainer and an international trainer, and of course a Deputy Mayor of Hackney, and has had some really interesting and quite difficult chapters in that borough over the past year or so. So I'm sure we will hear about some of that tonight. And I am equally delighted that we will be welcoming Councillor Jennifer Hemingway, who's a Sandwell councillor, but is also joining us to talk about what the Cooperative Party, who she works for as Equalities Officer, are doing on some of these issues to advance local government. So an absolutely illustrious panel of both lovely and incredibly qualified women tonight. So without further ado, fresh from a mayoral engagement and just about to put her children to bed later on, I would be delighted to welcome Taff to share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Claire, for the very kind introduction. So good evening, sisters, good evening, ladies. Nice to see you all. It's been a while since I've joined one of these kind of campaign launches or meetings, so it's wonderful to be amongst you all. It's wonderful to be amongst so many strong and inspirational women today. I know some of you, and I know some of your background stories, so it's good to have you here with us. I always say women are the backbone of society. We really are, and society essentially is politics, and politics is society. So we need many more women in politics, and we need many more women in leadership positions. As Claire has outlined, we've gone backwards, only a quarter of council leaders are women, yet we are probably in the majority in terms of female-male ratios. So I want to tell you or share a little bit about my own journey, my personal journey.
Recording in progress.
I'll keep it brief. So I've been a politician for 12 years. I started out in Luton in the south. I was in law, so my background is in law. I was very used to working with professional people, and very used to having, I worked in the private sector, so I was very used to just having or focusing on a career and working with more or less professional and fair people. But when I came into the world of politics, I found it quite the contrary, as some of you may know. When I was much younger, I feel a lot more older, but I was a lot younger. It was 12 years ago, and I was quite naive in terms of how awful some people can be. So when I went as a politician, it was a very male-dominated ward, and I stood against others, and I somehow managed to be selected. But upon the selection and upon making the selection speech, I was actually hurled with abuse there and then at the meeting, to the extent that the chair was almost thrown at me. So that was my first experience of politics in terms of standing up for my community and going forward. And I actually had very little, I was with the Labour Party prior to that, and I used to attend a few meetings here and there. I was very involved in the community, but not so much with the Labour movement in terms of being active. So when I went for it, I was really appalled and shocked at the way things were done, and I knew the next 4 years were going to be pretty quite a challenge. So, but luckily, I was very luckily straight into a cabinet position. So I got the support. I had a woman leader at the time who recognised what I would hope was, some sort of talent, some sort of skill. And I was straight into a cabinet position of community safety, and I did very well in that, and I was recognised nationally. So I did feel, I was given, some credit for the work I had already conducted prior to being a councillor. So some of that experience, some of the skills you've built over life, some of that was being recognised. And then, I was recognised. I worked with the police, and I worked in a lot of because it was, I don't know if many people know of Luton, but it's like a small London borough, and there were a lot of issues, including at the time extremism, EDL movement, etc. There was prostitution, sex traders at the time. So there was a lot, drug dealing. There was a lot of real complex issues that need to be dealt with, and I was then gone on to being recognised for making a difference in that area. So along the way, I was also then selected or appointed to be the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire. So that was another amazing opportunity for me to be able to continue to make that difference. And in life, in politics, you do get your ups and downs. And I always find when you do go up, someone is always trying to drag you down. And that did happen to me, and I was dragged down. But what I've learned over the years is always persevere in your journey. Even if you're not a politician yet, even if you haven't, been as active as you would like to be, or you haven't stood but would like to, there are plenty of women, plenty of sisters, plenty of other people who can show you the ropes. So find those people in your area, reach out to others, and use that, because you need to create that network of support for yourself. Even though you're within your own vicinity, there may not be many people. You need to find that network, and by you joining us today, we are your sisters, we are your network. So please do reach out and hear, if there's any difficulties you're going through, there will be others that have been there and done that, been through that, and they can show you the ropes and get you through that particular problem. So I then got married and came to the wonderful Tameside. So I then finished my, in fact, I didn't finish, I was deselected. I forgot about this episode of my life. So it was about 7 years ago. So by the same male-dominated ward, unfortunately, there was a lot of very bad politics, very bad tactics being used, where members were being people were being made into members just for the votes during the selection period. As you can imagine, it happens up and down the country in certain areas. And sadly, I'd never seen those people, but they voted me out and I was deselected. But luckily, at the same time, I was going off and being married. And so I moved to Tameside to join my husband, and I went straight into it. I didn't bat an eyelid. I went straight into it, and I was selected for the ward of Mosley. And that ward is actually 99.9% white. And I came from a ward which actually was my own community, so there's something there as well. But so I came to Mosley, and I wasn't put into any kind of cabinet position. Obviously, I was new to the area, so I built myself I got involved with my ward issues and really got to know the community. But what I found was the difference between myself as a woman of colour. I had to work, and I've been there 7 years, but I had to work, I don't know, I felt like 10 times harder than my colleagues. And I've even had colleagues that have not lifted, you know, kind of, sometimes I just felt that I had to work harder, and if I wasn't, there'd always be someone to say something bad about me, whereas others, kind of other, you know, people, other you know, men generally would get away with it. And that still stands. So in this recent election, I'm recognized for working harder than some colleagues, but in this election I still got least votes than you know, because what happened this election, we had an all out. So an all out means everyone was up for election, but I still got less votes than my male counterpart. And although I worked 10 times harder, so it's still there, but it's really, it can get really unfair sometimes when you do work so much harder. But at the end of the day, you know, putting that to the side, I work hard for my constituents. I work hard for my people, and I'm resolving their issues, and that's what the job is about. The job is about resolving issues for your constituents and making their lives a little bit easier. And, you know, whatever the issues are, whether it's education, housing, employment, crime, you know, even the very very low profile potholes and bin collections, even things like that do make a difference to the family's life, to the person's life. So if you can help in that aspect, it is a very, very rewarding job. It is a very rewarding role. So that's my journey. It's been a wonderful 12 years. I wouldn't change it for the world. I absolutely wouldn't change it, you know, despite the downs. You know, like I say, the role, the job is very rewarding if you can make that difference to someone's life. The amount of support I get from women in particular, the amount of support I get from my own constituency, you know, Cllr is Tameside also, so I've always had Cllr as a woman of support in my area. And I always, like I say, you build that network, so any issues you do come across, you just, you know, talk about it, or you just, you know, you just get an outside perspective, but do build that network. I think it is quite concerning that we have very few women council leaders in leadership positions. So I've been a councillor for 7 years in Tameside, but only recently, so after 7 years, despite my background and my achievements over the years, only recently, I think it's as recent as last year, I was actually recognised. So last year I became the chair of a scrutiny panel, of a children's scrutiny, in fact. So it was quite it's quite intense. And only this year, and I was a deputy mayor also, so only last year was when I was actually recognised. And this year I was the mayor of Tameside, the first ethnic minority and Muslim mayor of Tameside. And I think, you know, it's about time Tameside, you know, there is some good diversity here. And it's about time we had someone of colour, someone, you know, wearing the hijab, you know, someone different, because we've always had predominantly male mayors in my area, and now we're starting to get a few more females, but it's like, I think it's very good and inspirational to have someone like myself, not necessarily, you know, because of who I am, but because it's just the image as well, the image. And you know, for someone to be able to think, well, actually, you know, she's a woman of colour. She wears a scarf. She's not hesitant. She's confident. She's going for it. I can smash those ceilings too. I can break those barriers too, in their field or in the field of politics or anything. So that's my job this year, to bring inspiration, especially to our young people, our women of colour, to show that actually, you know, the way we're tarnished, the way we're labelled is very different. You know, certainly for people of my faith or of my particular background, are usually like, oh, they're the ones that take our jobs and don't do anything, or they take our money and they just come to this country, etc., etc. Well, that's obviously a myth, and it's absolutely incorrect. And for me, it's in my particular borough, it's breaking down those barriers and bringing the communities together more so, and creating cohesion. So going back onto, you know, why we have so many leaders, I think sometimes it's about opportunities. So it's about how you have your relationship with a particular, so for example, council leader, you know, so you know, somebody I think in the chat earlier on did mention we've had a decrease in chairs in positions. We've had a decrease of people being put in high profile positions, so the chair of this, chair of that, chair of particular responsibilities and roles and responsibilities once you're a councillor. That probably could be right. And if we've had that decrease in council leaders, that is concerning. But what's important is to build those relationships, to speak to your council leader, show them that, you know, who you are as a woman, you know, what you can bring to the roles, and say, I want to go for that, so you tell me when the time is right. And you know, so have those direct conversations. I mean, I in fact, like I said, I was a Tameside councillor 7 years ago. I had that direct conversation 7 years ago, and it's taken me 7 years to get to where I have in Tameside. But I just kept, you know, going at it. You know, this is my background. This is what I can do. This is, you know, I can help in this area. What do you need me for? Make myself useful to the council leader. Make myself useful to the people that have that influence. For them to say, well, actually, yeah, I think you should be here, and jobs shouldn't just be given out, you know, not based on merit. But sadly, it does happen, as you know. Roles and responsibilities are given out just based on the way you vote or on your friendship. Sadly, that still happens, and there needs to be change regarding that. When will that change take place? I don't know. I really don't know. But it's for people like us to be able to get into those roles and then create spaces and create a pathway for others. So when I was a member of the council in 2016, when I joined Tameside, I was the only ethnic minority councillor. In fact, I was the only ethnic minority person in those chambers on the first council meeting, and for me that was a massive concern. And since then we've had six you know, people of colour, people of you know, of different ethnic minorities, different religions, different faiths, but people of colour join us. And that's open pathways. And obviously in my mayoral role now, I hope it will encourage others to think, actually, you know what, I would like to go into politics, and I'd like to talk to this person more so. Going on to you know, what works into building inclusive cultures in local government. I mean, like I said earlier, women are the backbone of society, and we do need more women involved in politics, involved in the community, and not just councillor level but MP level. We need more people to come forward, so get involved in your campaigns. So if somebody, so we you know, we may or may not have the general election hopefully soon. When we do, you're all Labour Party members, get yourself involved in those campaigns, be at the forefront of those campaigns, make yourself useful, get to know if you're standing somewhere, get to know the community, get to know the issues, and really push your way forward. Sadly, women do have to push their way forward. My advice is to keep going, you know, keep persevering despite the lowdowns, despite being absolutely pushed down into the gutter. Keep going, because at the end of the day, what matters is the people, and their people need you more so than, you know, we've always had male councillors, male MPs, you know, male judiciary. We've always had this ongoing, but each profession, each council, each you know, the parliament, everything in society needs to be balanced, and it needs to be diverse. So let's start making that difference, and let's start bringing in others. For those that are councillors in this conference tonight, this campaign launch tonight, you know, I would ask you to just mentor someone, just take someone on board and say, actually, you know what, I'd like to show you the way. So just take one person on board. If it's a young person, a young lady, or a young, you know, anyone, just take them on board and show them the route, show them the pathway, because a lot of it does depend on your well, certainly in Tameside, it depends on your campaigning. If you're out there knocking on doors, then it gives you a leeway to get selected. So I wish you all the very best of luck. I hope my words have given some wisdom, some help. I really do wish you all the best. I'll stay on for a few minutes more, and then I shall have to leave. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Taf. I could see some furious nodding along from other sisters as you were talking there, and we fully understand that for the aforementioned caring responsibilities, you might not be able to join us for the full evening, but the way that you described your personal journey and how colleagues in the movement can kind of build you up and knock you down, and the lack of a meritocracy and a kind of clear relationship between levels of hard work and levels of power that follow, I'm sure something that a lot of people will relate to across many different authorities, but overwhelmingly positive messages that sisterhood is what gets you through. So thank you so much. I am really excited now to move on to our fabulous LWN Executive Committee sister, who is tackling an incredibly high profile role in an authority, it's fair to say, has had one or two hiccups and difficulties and challenges in the past few months. Sharon was once homeless herself and then went on to become a national expert and champion for the cessation of homelessness and rough sleeping, just among many, many other achievements. And I'm really, really pleased to welcome Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's great to see everyone on the line. I think my starting point, I'm going to start when I was at the selection process, and I think that's the point where I'm going to start mine, of being selected to become a councillor, because the experience for me wasn't necessarily of the greatest as a starting point. So when I was going to be selected in the ward, it was an all-women's selection, which some people found, or some men, I should say, found very offensive to them, and they wanted not to have an all-women's selection. And one particular, who was the secretary of the branch, left the party, and then, because of all women shortlist, and then proceeded to walk around throughout the whole of my campaign, refusing to call me by my name, and called me Bob Marley's sister, but not to my face. So those were sort of the difficult things that we have to face sometimes, or we shouldn't have to face when we are in politics. But I think the key thing for me was about my attitude towards that, and it was really going to be, do you know what, I'm going to be the best that I can, and I'm going to make my communities proud and actually represent the people that I wanted to be elected to represent, and also make sure that people felt like they were being represented. And that was really important to me. So when I joined the Labour group in Birmingham, and we have a chamber of, at the time it was 120 councillors, and we had the majority seats, I wanted to be proactive and look at, how can I get involved? What can I do? And I automatically went into a group officer role, took on the less glamorous role of being the treasurer, but cracked on with that and made sure I put myself towards that actual job. Moving on from that, my local MP, who I adore, Jess Phillips, she was a councillor in Birmingham as well, and Jess was the victims champion. And when she went on to Parliament, I took on the victims champion role following on from her. I think as you go along and you hear different stories from different sisters across the group, and actually seeing some of the opportunities that were there, and sometimes not all of the great, sometimes the men taking all the opportunities, and we all saw that. So I decided that I wanted to throw myself into training, not because I felt like I needed to be, this thing of, oh, women need to be upskilled in order to get a position, but also because I wanted to broaden my networks. I wanted to see what other people were saying, and just sort of increase my toolbox of how I would navigate through being a local councillor. So I did quite a fair bit of LWN training and also LGA training, which was super good for me, which that meant that I got to expand my networks of sisters, not just in my own city, but across the country, which meant that I was stepping out of the Birmingham bubble and actually building that network. And that's when I found that I learned tips from other people and actually helped me to build my resilience, and also just see what other councils were doing that I could bring back to Birmingham. And I think that's super important. One of the things that Jess had said to me when she was a councillor was when I said to her, you know, what advice would you give me being a counsellor? And she said, just ask. And I said, really? Just ask. Sometimes we're too frightened to ask for support. We're too frightened to ask if we can do a role or anything else like that. So, you know, men would always ask if they felt like whether they could do it or not, they would always push themselves forward. So I asked if I could be an ambassador for homelessness, and I then got appointed as Birmingham's first and only ambassador for for homelessness and rough sleeping. But what I realised was that I didn't, although I was operating in local government, what I didn't want to do as a counsellor was I didn't want to just focus it just on the council role. I wanted to understand how my role was affecting what was happening in Parliament, and what was the Labour Party's position on things. I would be cheeky and just ask and reach out and email shadow ministers and just say, this is what we're doing in Birmingham, or could I have a meeting, or find someone who knew that person, ask them if they could introduce so that I could get into the door and just actually share my views. And I think that was really, really important for me. Now, I sit on a cabinet, there's 10 of us on the cabinet and 80% are women. And I think having been on a lot of training, particularly with LWN, and followed and supported all the campaigns, one of the key things that I wanted to do was really put myself in the space where I wasn't just coming to webinars and I wasn't just coming into the room for training, that I was actually taking it back to Brum and actually seeing how we could slowly try and help to influence implementing some of those things, as did some of the other sisters who are on our group. And as a result, no cabinet member will sit on an all-male or all-white panel. It's not allowed. Those that accidentally ended up on a panel, we had to put a procedure in place that there was now a form so that anybody who asks for a cabinet member in Birmingham to sit on a panel, they have to fill in the form so we can make sure we know that they're not going to be on a panel that is all male or white, which is really, really important too. And anyone slips up, they get in trouble with the rest of us. So that's really clear. And although, and as Claire said, we've been through some significant challenges in Birmingham. So whilst we've taken steps forward, I do want to point out the first ever councillor in Birmingham City Council was elected in November 1911. The first ever Labour councillor was elected in 1917. And the first and only ever female leader of the council was in 1993, who was a Labour councillor. We've never had a female leader of the council since, so we have still got significant ways to go. But in the spirit of sisterhood, and as Claire said, let's just keep it positive. Some of the things that I want to do moving forward is, in my role as deputy leader, is I've already asked the chief executive if we can start to review safeguarding and wellbeing processes around councillors, because it almost feels sometimes there's a little bit of a grey area. That's not to do with us, that's maybe the Labour Party or whatever else it is, especially when I've heard experiences of other people. So that's really important about trying to push for practical changes, and whilst you're in the space and have the ability to influence. And also, I've also reached out and asked for all cabinet members and senior managers to go through reverse mentoring. And that's where we're just about to go through the process of getting a program together where we will mentor care leavers, and they will reverse mentor us and tell us what they think of the city through their eyes. And that's about putting in and gaining back. And I think that'll be a really worthwhile process for everybody that will be involved. So I think for me, I echo what has been said previously. Sisters, we need to network, we need to build up our teams, we need to understand the processes. One of the things that Shabana Mahmood always said to me when we was looking at campaigns was, go to the legislation and see what the law actually says, and build your campaign around some of that if we're looking for legislation changes or other things like that. So I would say do your community campaigning, but also let's see if we can try and push for policy changes so that we can get a better deal for us women. I think there's a huge thing around us fighting for changes in law around the way that we work as councils, not being able to have hybrid meetings. You know, I go to many meetings that are official council meetings, and we have officers who are at home online, and the members are in the room because we can't take decisions without being in the actual room. So things like that we need to continue to lobby for, and also pushing for those cultural changes. Actually, what is it we can be asking the Labour government to put into place, particularly around helping us to improve culture and behaviour. I know that we've all been fighting for fighting against sexual conduct within party, but also think there's also something around coercive behaviour, harassment, those things that might not be in that sexual space but happen to sisters every single day in local government, whether that's on their group or out in their communities that they serve. So I guess on that note, I think we've got a huge amount to do. But I think if we work together collaboratively and actually not just launch this campaign that we're starting today, but take it back into our local authorities and actually shout loud and proud in every space that we are occupying, and making sure that other people that are occupying spaces where we are not in the room, that they can take our campaign in the room too. And I'll end there, Claire.
I always want to do a bit of a whoop when Sharon has spoken, because however harsh the reality you are having to serve, it always leaves me feeling really affirmed and upbeat. And that is exactly the kind of mood of activism that we want to take away from tonight. And I think some really pertinent points there. And certainly that point you raise around, coercive behaviours within Labour groups and what have you, is such an important discussion that I think, has not been named and articulated very widely within the Labour movement. But we certainly know, because they end up in our inbox, that there are a lot of inter-Labour group bullying and inappropriate behaviours companies that aren't necessarily relating to sexual harassment, although they are numerous too, that are sitting in a very long pipeline at the governance and legal unit. And in the meantime, people are still having to share meeting spaces and still having to negotiate power dynamics within very difficult circumstances. So certainly much more work to be done there. Now, you're still with us, Sue, to my delight. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Baroness Sue Hayman. Sue obviously was the MP for Workington, is now a Lord spokesperson for local government and DEFRA, for which you used to be the shadow cabinet member. So a huge breadth of knowledge across different policy areas and a huge breadth of experience yourself as a woman in public life within the Labour movement. So thank you so much for making the time to join us in between legislating, and welcome.
Thank you very much. I think they've got verbal diarrhoea in the chamber, so I might get away with it. The difference to the Commons is there's no speaking time in the Lords, so people can chunter on for as long as they want to. I think they're doing that this evening. So no, thank you ever so much for coming. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you tonight, because I started off in my early 20s, kind of by accident really, when I got elected to the town council, when I thought I was just being a paper council candidate to help out, as can happen. But it was, I actually really enjoyed being a town councillor, and there is nothing wrong with actually doing parish and town roles to begin with, because you learn an awful lot and you can still do an awful lot for your local community. Then once I had children, I found it too difficult to go. All the meetings were in the evening. There was a lot of expectation in the local community. I was a lot younger than most of the councillors, so they actually expected me to do a bit more, I think. So I stopped going, and there's been a bit of talk about remote meetings. And I honestly think that if remote meetings had been there for me when I was at that stage, I wouldn't have had to completely give up. So I do think it's incredibly important, and it's something that we actually did amendments on it in the Levelling Up Bill, which we're still doing in the Lords, and we'll probably try and push that through again. But then from then, I still, although I wasn't on a councillor anymore, I did stay very active within the party. I was a women's officer, and I got very involved with LWN, with the wonderful Val Price, for those of you who remember her. And I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been the Labour Women's Network and all the encouragement, all the support and all the training that I got at that time. Because I think one of the things, I don't know if it's how people feel, I think younger women perhaps are better than we were, but I just really didn't kind of believe in myself and think that I was capable of doing it. And actually, that's what Labour Women's Network gave me. They told me I was good enough. And they gave me sufficient training and belief that I felt strong enough to continue and to carry on pushing forward with a political career, which is what I really wanted to do. Later on, we moved to Cumbria, which is where I still live now, and where I was the Member of Parliament. And I got into the county council, became a county councillor in Cumbria. But I didn't actually put myself forward to go on the list, the candidates list. And it was only when a Labour councillor died and there was a by-election, somebody just came up to me and said, for goodness sake, Sue, put yourself forward. Because I lived, in the ward where it was, put yourself forward. So I did, and I won the seat at the by-election, and again, loved being a county councillor. But I do think that maybe women shouldn't have to feel they can do something until somebody asks them to do it. I think we need to really work with women and mentor them and encourage them and say, don't wait to be asked. If you want to do this, go on, put yourself forward, do it, you're good enough. And I think that's one of the things that, people like myself, you kind of climb the greasy pole, if you like, something that we can do and help. So I'm always really happy to mentor and support and do anything I can to encourage women to go forward, because we're not going to get more women leaders of councils if we don't really kind of continue to support and do everything we can to tell women they're just as good as the men. They need to put themselves forward. That's not just saying it's been easy. My husband complains I always over-prepare. I over-prepare because I cannot bear the thought of ever being caught out and not knowing anything. And I think that's, again, because we have to work harder, we have to know more, we have to be better, unfortunately. How we get around that, I think, is by constantly being better and getting higher, higher up in politics, having more women leaders. So women coming behind us don't have those same insecurities that perhaps I had when I was younger and I was starting out in my career. It's important, I think, to have lots of support, whether that's from, say, Labour Women's Network, whether it's from your family, whether it's from friendship, colleagues, comrades, the kind of sisterhood, if you like. But it is so important to have that support network. And I really think that's something that we have to move on with in Labour Women's Network. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure Cllr and others have got, I know you do lots of fantastic training, but again, anything I can do to help within any support networks, please do let me know. And you also need a sense of humour, I can tell you that as well. Again, I also think one of the things that is important to do is to learn from failure and to not be put off, because often it's not personal, it's not you, it's not because you're not good enough. It could be because it's a very competitive environment that you're in. It could be that the men want to choose a man. That happens, unfortunately, and it's happened to me. I was once told, I think we've got enough women now, so we mustn't let these things put us off. We mustn't be knocked back by this. I'm just thinking of one example. When I was a county councillor, I was encouraged to put in for the vacant parliamentary seat of Workington. And after much discussion with various people, I put in for the selection. And the GMB were backing me and were really helpful. The chair of the branch where I was county councillor was the local GMB officer. He wrote a letter to the regional GMB to complain that I had got above myself by applying to be the parliamentary candidate. Fortunately for me, the GMB told him where to get off. But the fact that he felt that he could write that letter about me as his county councillor to say I should know my place. I was the county councillor. I thought it was utterly appalling. And fortunately for me, the union pushed back. But I do think we need to think about how we work with unions as well in order to ensure that women candidates at whatever level of politics get that kind of union support and backing that they need, because often that's where the men swing in more strongly than we have. They certainly have in the past. But again, looking at the practical stuff, I mean, the two previous speakers have laid out an awful lot of that. But I do think we need to look at selection processes. How do we encourage women to come forward and go through the selection processes. It's often very complicated. The selections are different in different areas. It would be good if we could look at how we can sort that out and have a system where we encourage women to put themselves forward, to go onto panels and to be part of selections. I think another issue, I don't know how we do this as a party, but thinking about the number of Labour leaders who are women, I do wonder if one issue is because the pay is so low. Often it's very, very poor, the pay being a county councillor. I mean, I earned 8,000 a year being a county councillor. And once you get to a leader, it's better, but it isn't very much. So you can have a huge impact. If you've got a woman who's got a successful, well-paid career, it's a big thing then to take it on full time as a leader if you're going to take a big salary cut. Now, it's okay being an MP because you get a really good salary. More tough being the Lords because you only get paid when you get here, and it's a bit more complicated, but I won't go into that. And then you combine that with the fact you don't get maternity leave or carers leave at all councils. I do think we need to think about that whole career structure. We need to think about the career structure of councils and councillors, and how as a party we can support women through that. That's, I think, a particular point that I think we need to work at. But I would say, having been in the Commons and now in the Lords, the experience that people who have been in local government bring to the higher levels of politics is absolutely invaluable. You really notice when you're doing bills like the Levelling Up Bill, or working on housing in particular, for example, planning, we're doing a lot on planning at the moment, the people who are contributing who have never been in local government just don't understand a lot of the implications of what they're trying to do. So I would say, go for it, be a councillor. We need more councillors, we need more leaders, but also if you want to carry on clambering up like I did, then please do, because your experience as a councillor is really, really important once you get up into Parliament.
Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate the way that you never kick down the ladder behind you and always have some words of encouragement for fellow LWN sisters, and your comments about, always feeling like you have to prepare more, you have to be the best, you have to work the hardest, reminded me of one of the raffle prizes we had at our recent LWN Gala dinner, which is a mug that says, "May you have the confidence of a mediocre white man." And I always remember Harriet Harman saying equality will have been achieved when there's as many shit women in Parliament as there are shit men, frankly. And I think we can all agree local government has one or two of those too. Apologies for the use of language for anyone who is offended, but I'm sure you've all seen and met them all. Right, thank you very much indeed, Sue. I am delighted next to move on to introduce Councillor Anntoinette Bramble, who has held so many roles across the LGA, across the Labour movement, across Labour Women's Network, that we continue to be extremely proud of her. She has been Deputy Leader of LGA Labour. She has been Deputy Mayor of Hackney. She is now newly appointed and elected as Chair of LGA Labour, so does actually have some power to help us implement some of the things that we have been pointing to tonight, but has temporarily disappeared on my screen. Anntoinette, are you there?
I am.
Hey.
I am. Thank you for that warm, sisterly welcome. So I'll start by saying I've got a bit of bad news to start with, but then I'll get to the good news. The bad news is, even if every single one of us here in this virtual space got elected tomorrow, the great news is, if everyone here in this virtual space did get elected, by virtue of us being women, being sisterly, we absolutely begin to create the atmosphere to change things of influence and power. Because what is wrong cannot stop you from standing. Because it doesn't change by us not confronting or being in those spaces. So I just want to encourage you in that. So as Cllr said, held various roles throughout my career. And one of the things that I have been is the first Black woman to be Deputy Mayor of London Borough of Hackney. And I was actually the first Black woman to be the Deputy Leader of LGA Labour Group. But I want to get to a place where someone like me isn't making history, because whether you are a woman or a woman of colour, that we are in places of influence and power, and it becomes so normalised that actually the only history that we are making is what we do for our own authentic self. But until we're at that space, I'll continue to do my part. I think one of the most important things to say is that you don't have to be an elected member to make the difference that we want to see. Each of you have a platform, each of you have a sphere of influence, each of you have a voice, and you use that to navigate where you are. I think we've talked about why there are not enough women leaders, and I think it's because the atmosphere in politics is still generated and dominated by men. And that's something that we really need to seek to change. And as the newly appointed chair, it's definitely something that's on my mind when I'm in that space of LGA Labour, how we get more women coming forward. I think one speaker before said, you know, don't wait to be asked. No, look at the skills that you have in your various roles that you hold as a woman and think about how you utilise them in a position of power and influence where you think you are really, really interested in. Because I've looked at, you know, being in politics, being in what I do, I'm one of the few women, and certainly one of the few women of colour, and the majority of men don't really care if they can do the job. And they don't really care if they get it wrong. They have the kind of attitude that they're going to do it and they'll do it till they get it right. And that isn't even a criticism then, but I think as women, we need to be not so risk averse. You don't have to fully understand everything before you get involved or delve into politics. I think for me, because I have a background in as a teacher, I don't spend a lot of time focusing on what I can't do and how bad it could be. I'm not saying that I don't have those moments, because I do, but I have a certain amount of capacity and I try and focus on what I can shift and how I can do that. And I think if sometimes women, if we think more about our strengths and what we come to the table with, I think that helps us with our confidence. Sometimes I still get nervous when I go to speak, but it's kind of like I'm there because I'm invited. I'm there because I've got something to say. If I'm a speaker, I'm holding that level of expertise, and that isn't arrogant. That's just a matter of fact. And if we take that pressure of us, then it gets easier. If I don't know everything, I've learned to be more confident and say, I don't know, I'll get back to you. Who said that I've got to be the font knowledge of everything? You know, the Prime Minister, and we've been through so many, there's not enough time to list all the Tory Prime Ministers we've had. They are not the font of all knowledge and they're running the country. So why am I going to put that pressure on myself, thinking that I've got to know everything at all times? Absolutely not. And I think as women, we've just got to take that pressure off of ourselves. I do think that beyond the politics and the nature of what's going on, I think we have to think about the barriers facing women. And look, there's two things. It's great to have a mentor and be a mentor. I'm a trainer for the Labour Women's Network. If you're here and you haven't joined, please join the sisterhood today. And I'm a trainer for the Local Government Association. I'm the national trainer for children, for children's and young people. But there is a difference between those of us that need to be mentored and supported, and there's a difference between those of us that are not where we are because of the barriers. And I think it's really important that we don't conflate the two. All women are not in places of influence and power because they need a mentor. It's because we haven't tackled the barriers that stop them from being where they need to be. And some of those barriers are whether it's around care and responsibility, whether it's around pay, whether it's the gender the pay gap is something that we still need to tackle, and it's really important that we talk about those things. I think hybrid working is key and remote working is key. Do you remember before the pandemic, every employer made it seem like it was impossible to work remotely? Now it's something that's commonplace, and it's really frustrating that although the government made local government stop working remotely, for a long time in Parliament, they still could. There needs to be more flexible arrangements around working. And I think that for women, it's how we lobby and campaign around that. And I think that, so whether you're a governor, whether you're a backbench councillor, also remember, if you're not an elected councillor, you can attend scrutiny meetings, you can attend full councils, you can ask questions of those who are in places of power and influence about the things that are important to you. So never forget that you can do that. So what I would say to you as women, you know, I hope that you feel maybe inspired or encouraged by any one of us or all of us. But what I would say to you is that I want you to think about, when you go back to where you are in society, whatever position you hold, think about how you can influence and make that change, and maybe identify some of the barriers that you might have to tackle. And there's a network of sisters to help talk you through any of those barriers. But I just want to leave you with this. You don't have to do some of the things that I've done, none of the things that I've done, and you certainly don't need to be an elected member to instrument change. We are phenomenal women and we all have a voice. Some of us just need to learn and navigate how we elevate it more. And when you do, sisters, you will see the power of the movement. Thank you, Claire.
Oh, thank you, Anntoinette. And you are a phenomenal woman, and you do always leave the people that you are sharing your time and space with feeling like phenomenal women. So thank you for, you know, next time somebody asks me a question I don't know, I'm going to have the confidence to say, I'm not the font of all knowledge, and that's fine, as that is something I really struggle with. So I will take that away from your contribution. Thank you so much.
Hi, Claire. I'm trying to contribute. Am I allowed to speak?
We've just one further speaker to hear from, and then I'm going to literally launch our motion to conference later on, and then I'll take some further contributions, suggestions and questions from other sisters on the call. But first of all, it is my massive pleasure to work on our last, but certainly not our least, guest speaker for the evening, Councillor Jen Hemingway from Sandwell, who has experience across a couple of authorities and who is working with the cooperative movement to transform their work across equality, diversity and inclusion, all whilst being a parent herself.
I can't tell if Claire has stopped speaking because she's frozen on my screen. Well, I'm going to keep going because I can't tell where Claire has gone. But
keep going, Jen.
There you are, Claire.
Apologies, tech is not on our side tonight, but I really am delighted to see you. Quite literally delighted. Carry on, thanks.
Thank you very much, Claire. And thank you to the speakers that went before. I know a few of you, and I am very, very proud to be on this panel with you. I'm going to be speaking a lot about what we're doing in the co-op movement, but I want to talk a little bit about myself first. And I am not a woman known for keeping her mouth shut. And I am not only fine with that, I'm quite proud of that. Thank you very much. I first stood to be a councillor in 2019 when I lived in the East Midlands. And at that time, I was a single mum. I had fairly recently been made redundant from 2 jobs. Oh, the glories of Tory cuts. And I was navigating the joys of our country's benefit system. And I had started to think that maybe I could do, well, you know, I think there are things that can be done, but I don't think they're doing it right. Maybe I can do it better. And these were the thoughts going through my head. And I spoke about this with people I knew, sisters that had been counselors. I spoke about it with other mums at the school gate. And I was told by all the other mums, people like us don't do that. They're not going to listen to people like us. And if there was anything to strengthen my resolve to do it, that was it. Said, that's why I'm doing it. They don't want to listen to us, then they're going to have to. So I put myself forward. I did take some interesting advice from some sisters that had been or currently were counselors. I think one of the most interesting pieces of information that I had from someone who is still a dear, dear friend, she said, you will find that you expect to have trouble from the opposition. You're going to find more trouble from the men you work with than you think you will. They're going to be the bigger problem in your world. And sadly, she was right. I have encountered that many times, but didn't stop me. I signed that piece of paper to become a counselor. And the very first thing I did is I marched down the hall to the head of Legal and Democratic Services, who was a woman. And I said, hello, I am not your average demographic for a counselor around here. What's your policy on remuneration of childcare? And she paused a moment and she said, well, I don't think we have one. But if we don't, that's an equalities issue and we should write one. And I smiled and I said, you and I will be good friends. Turned out we were. Incidentally, a few months later, we did have one. So that was the first thing I would say. If you think it isn't right, change it. That's the best thing we can do as women in politics. If it isn't right, change it. So with that thought in mind, I did everything that I could, but I found a lot of times I had people trying to stop me. Anytime I said anything, it was like, oh, she's making a power play there. You can't have an idea without it being a power play. And that wound me up to no end. But I never really saw myself at that point as a woman that was particularly ambitious. I was a woman that was just trying to fix things, a little bit here, a little bit there. I just wanted to fix things. And it wasn't until changes in my life came along. Since that time, I have a new partner. I have moved to a different part of the country. I'm now in the West Midlands and a new local authority. And I think one of the most frustrating things for me to realize is that I found ambition. It would be more accurate to say I rediscovered it, because I actually had been very ambitious as a child. I remember being very annoyed that Madeleine Albright beat me to being the first female Secretary of State of the United States, because when I was 13, that's exactly what I wanted to do. But somewhere I'd convinced myself that I wasn't good enough. And now I was rediscovering this ambition, but I was finding, to my immense frustration, that one of the factors in me rediscovering it was that I had a partner now. That made me furious. I thought, why did I feel I couldn't do this before? Why did I feel that I had barriers in front of me? Because somebody needs to look after my daughter. I don't have family here. Who's going to look after my daughter? I had help at home that I didn't have before. And it made me furious that I had not felt I could pursue those ambitions without having to give up something else that was of value. And I thought, how many other women do not try for positions of leadership for this very same reason? And this was a lot of the motivation for the project that we've been doing with the Cooperative Party. And I'm very proud to say, actually, that one of my fellow speakers, Anntoinette, she was actually one of our joint leads on this project. We called it the Diverse Councils Project. And we were working with Baroness Wilcox, adapting some work that was done in the Welsh LGA, very successful work about increasing diversity in local government. And I'm all about intersectionality. It's about all strengths. It's about getting women, it's about minorities, LGBT, young people, disabled people. Often another area, disabled women, I think, have a lot more barriers than a lot of people realize. And I know some on the call that I've had this conversation with before, but all of these intersectional groups, all of these women face particular issues that others don't. And unless you've been there, you might not even see it. But one of the biggest things I think that has held back women leaders is the structural barriers. So as long as those are there are always going to be some of us that are held back. We can scream, we can shout, some of us can lead the way, except those barriers are still going to be there. So it is our job to remove them. It is our job to break them down. So as Cooperative Party, we did a bit of research. And one of the things that we looked at, we had a big consultation throughout England, and we found that 92% of our respondents very firmly felt that having a more diverse council that was representative of their communities made for better decisions, made for better communities. Listening to the voices of women and minorities, it makes it better. And yet less than half of councillors felt they were even coming close to achieving that. So let's do it. One of the things that we are doing at the Cooperative Party is we've recently launched a Diverse Councils Declaration. Now this has step-by-step practical things that you can do in your councils publicly, visibly, to change those barriers. And a lot of the women on this call, a lot of the women at LWN have contributed to things that we pulled in. We didn't just say, "Ooh, I got an idea, let's run with that." No, we looked around and we said, who's doing it well? So I know that some of the carers policies that we have suggested and said, part of it should be implementing this. I know that Nan Sloan was very, very much a part of making sure that those existed at all, and some of the parental leave. So we have many people in LWN that have influenced this. And I'm very, very proud of that as a proud graduate of many of the LWN's training myself. So I will happily share that with you. Reach out to me if it's something you want to do. There are elements of this about making a visible public commitment. There's a lot in there about well-being of counselors. We recognize that bullying is a problem, about mental health for counselors and ways you can support one another, making sure that you have those policies to support people with caring responsibilities. This is something I've just been trying to get through with my own council, as I have a colleague who is herself a performance champion. She's part of the exec, and she doesn't feel that she can advance any further in her political career because she is a carer, full-time carer to an adult disabled daughter. She has so much to give. She has so much knowledge that we cannot replicate. She should be in cabinet. She has the skills. And we have a good council. I'm proud to say that we do have a woman as the leader of our council. So we're doing something right, but there's always more you can do. So have a look at the Diverse Councils Charter. I see somebody has already shared it in the chat, so have a look at that. As Equalities Officer for the party, drop me a line and I can talk you through step by step how you can implement it and start making some of those changes in your own council at a local level to break down those barriers. And I would say, if I had anything I wanted to say to all of my sisters out there, is, as many others have said, these networks, they are a godsend. And I have found that for myself. I have family members that if I'm having a moment of doubt and I'm starting to think, oh, I'm spinning so many plates, I have 10 dinner services in the air right now, and I feel like I'm not doing any one of my jobs well. And I start to think, I can't do this. I have family members that will turn around to me and they'd say, what would Nan say to you? What would Claire say to you? What would all of your friends in LWN say to you? What would your sisters tell you? And if I'm ever questioning it, I'll pick up the phone. I'll ring Samara, who I saw on the call, and she'll tell me, you can do this, sister. And we support one another. We are the strength of the movement. And let's change the world.
Let's change the world indeed. Thank you so much, Jen. I'm really looking forward to having a thorough look at the Diverse Councils Charter and all the resources here. We are not in the business of reinventing the wheel in LWN. We are in the business of stealing and amplifying the brilliant work that other sisters or other comrades in the movement have already done. So really, really pleased to hear about that. Thank you. And I particularly related to your comment that every time you have a good idea, it's treated as a power play. I don't know how many people on the call have watched the TV series Succession, in which a series of siblings vie to take over their dad's empire. but it felt at many times like a Labour group meeting in which absolutely every bit of good news was treated with the utmost levels of suspicion, especially if it came from a bright young woman. So that's exactly the sort of thing that we need to change. Right, without further ado, I am going to pop a link in the comments and just briefly share my screen, because we have officially launched part 1 of our campaign, which is a motion to Women's Conference, which we need you to put through your women's branches or your CLPs, ask your secretaries to put it on the agenda. The deadline is the 14th of September, but you will note that August we don't have party meetings. So ideally, if you would like to help us further this through the Labour movement, you are asking for it to be scheduled onto July agendas or early September agendas at the latest. Speak in favour of it, sisters, take up your space. And then make sure your secretary or whoever is appointed to have access to the Labour Party democracy portal does actually submit it, because we've all been in meetings where motions have been passed and then disappeared through administrative failings. But there is a PDF there, there is a Word document there, and essentially this motion asks for some legislative change from the next Labour government in the form of statutory parental and carers leave for councillors, an end to the daftness that the Tories brought in of it being illegal to have hybrid council meetings, but calls on wider cultural change to address the very issues we have been talking about tonight. The link is in the comments there, so you can explore that at your own leisure, and we'll be sure to send it around all of Elderbrand's members and supporters. And you know, if you can't face going to your branch meeting, then please share it on Twitter and encourage others to do so. We can all contribute to amplifying its message in different ways. But we very much want this to be a long-term campaign. You will not fix the women's leadership gap in local government overnight. We know we won't fix some of these cultural problems overnight either. We really want to add in and build on this as we go. And I've seen 1 or 2 really helpful comments in the chat function tonight that we'll certainly be saving and going through and picking up on. In particular, there was one point that noted that there have, in response to the increased levels of threat, abuse and violence or assaults to women in public life, been significant resource. It's not enough, but it's still something to protect women parliamentarians from the known threats towards them, but no significant resource or coordination or even responsibility attributed for keeping women councillors safe. We do actually have another motion going to Labour Party conference, should you want to get really busy on Elderbrand's behalf about exactly this, about ending male violence, specifically in relation to women, protections for women in public life, and calling on the next Labour manifesto to commit to implementing the recommendations that come out of the Joe Cox Civility Commission, which is open for submissions at the moment. But certainly safety of councillors needs to be part of both of these conversations as a high priority. I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I'm going to take some snappy and upbeat, where remotely possible, contributions from the sisters who have kindly waited patiently to contribute tonight. And then I'll just wrap up by asking our remaining panelists to respond in just a minute each, if that is okay, not to each contribution, to all the contributions collectively. Right, I can see hands.
Sorry, you might be able to hear that. I've got my vote.
Hit by the bell, but thank you so much for being with us too. Okay, if you are able to rejoin us, great, and if not, thank you so much. Right, I can see Suzanne, Amina and Jodie, first of all, please. Suzanne from Manchester, mighty Manchester.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I'm Suzanne Richards. I'm a councillor on Manchester City Council. Just on a positive note, we're now 47 women and 41 men. I'm a graduate of Nan Sloan's absolutely brilliant training of how to get selected and elected as a woman councillor, and we still use her format for training to encourage more women to come forward. In fact, we were doing it just a couple of weeks ago in Manchester. I just wanted to echo really that we despite having that balance on the council, still face the challenges of retaining women on the council, particularly when they become mothers. And we really saw an increase during COVID when we had hybrid meetings, an increase in attendance and participation in a really positive way. And it's been to a lot of our frustrations that we've lost that ability to have those hybrid meetings. We've kept some of them on in terms of our Labour group meetings. So we have Labour group meetings in person, but our policy discussions and that, we always make sure that there are online alternatives for people so that they can be active and get involved as Labour councillors. I think probably one of the big challenges still is that once you are on the council is still breaking through, and I think some of those barriers around, oh, it's always been done like this, and I think the comments that some of the speakers have made around having to wait your turn and stand in line, and you know, really talented women that have come forward being quite visibly pushed back for all the wrong reasons really. So yeah, anything that we can do to support the motion and that, I'll take it to our Labour group and hopefully we can get it forward for you at conference. Thank you for organising the meeting.
Thank you for contributing to the meeting, and thank you for pushing it forward. We really want this to be the beginning of a process and not the end of it. So very many thanks. Amina Ali, are you there?
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. First, I want to thank all the speakers. It was really, really inspiring to hear from women. And it's really good to hear different experiences of women across the Labour movement in local government and what they're going through. I just wanted to talk a bit about support for women. A lot of women do, as the stories have been told tonight, do feel isolated sometimes in their councils. And I wanted to find out about the sisterhood, because what do we do when women find themselves in spaces where they are not being supported by other women? Because sometimes it's not just the men, but we don't find support from other women, and that can also be a problem. And also when it's also sometimes when women are being bullied along racial lines and then there's no sisterhood, that's what I think is really important, because I know that lots of women, especially Black women, do experience that, because I'm part of a support group for Black councillors, and especially Black women councillors, and we do have a lot of problems, and I think we don't sometimes have the allyship to be able to speak to other women who are not Black or of colour sometimes, to be able to understand that. And I'd be interested for Jen actually Jennifer Hemingway, because I'm definitely aware in the Midlands that there are particular women who are Black councillors who are actually going through some issues and are not getting the support from women up there. So it's interesting to hear if you'll come across it. And I know, for example, Sandwell Council definitely have issues, and I wondered where do those women go and what spaces do they have for support? Because I think it's great to talk about all the amazing things, but we need to also talk about some of the really dark things that are going on in our party that we need to rule out and root out. And I think it's, you know, hate me or whatever, but I don't feel I'm doing myself a justice, or any women who are like me any justice, who don't have a voice, if I don't air that in spaces like this. And I think it's important we look at that.
Thanks, Mina. I think that's really important. And one of the things that we often caution is that just because women are on the wrong side of the power balance in a patriarchy doesn't mean women aren't agents of a patriarchy. We are all socialized within these power imbalances. We adopt the behaviors we see men using to survive and thrive, you know, which obviously means that on many times our detractors, our bullies, the people exerting, you know, coercive or negative behaviors are in fact women. And yet we don't want to add to women's enormous to-do list by saying you must also save, support, rescue all the other women. So finding the ways in which we can amplify and exert sisterhood without making it for the women to fix absolutely everything, or for the people of colour to fix all the racism and what have you, is such an important factor, because exhaustion is part of the problem as much as anything else. So very welcome. Right, I've got Jo Goslin, Juminju, and Sharon Webster, please.
Hiya, it's Jo Gosling from North Warwickshire. I've tried really hard to kind of tweak those statistics and make the 25% slightly better, but didn't manage on becoming the first woman's leader of North Warwickshire this time. But, you know, we're still in there and still hoping for maybe a by-election or two to swing that our way later this year. But my question's kind of around, we've managed to get a really even group this time. We've got 7 really strong women and 8 men. And we very nearly had an equal split. And we've got quite a lot of open-minded, quite a lot of progressive thought in the group, but there's still some kind of sticking points. And I wondered how, and again, with women as well, and that kind of motion forward, what's the best way to kind of the education programme, you know, the gentle teasing it in, not just always for having to be the example or kind of have that debate or to, you know, kind of meet it head on, but is there a more subtle, softly way that we can kind of influence and kind of take things forward?
Oh, softly is not my style. I'm going to leave it to
I
to
think that's
respond to that one.
I keep running into walls and I'm not making friends and influencing people. I think that there is almost a sense that you alienate sometimes, and it's people that are intending to do well or think they're doing well that you just need to address, but not always with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think many of us will recognise that. Thank you very much, Jodie. Jumin.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jumin Su from Greenwich and Woolwich. Recently, we kind of doing pretty well on this women's representations. Like we send 5 women out of 05 to the regional conference, and we are going to send 3 women out of 03 to the annual conference. So I'm really, as a women's office, I'm very happy about that. In the meantime, that we also got a very good BAME representation as well. We have 3 out of 5 BAME, and this time we got 2 out of 3 BAME. So that's very good. However, in the CLP, I was still kind of told that there's not enough representation of disabled members. But then that is very tricky because not all disability is visible. And there's a kind of a subtle thing that I feel that maybe, you know, this disability is raised to kind of maybe criticize that women are overrepresented in this case. Have you met this kind of the situation that when you have women actually overrepresented, all women, then there's other issues being raised saying you haven't reached equality yet?
Yeah, I mean, as a speaker mentioned earlier that they were told we have enough women now, and often you'll find whataboutery is one of the tools of finding ways of saying we've got enough of you now and trying to put people back in their box. On the disability front, I have to say a lot of the measures in that motion we think will advance disabled councillors just as much as they will advance women, obviously, and women disabled councillors, because clearly, you know, hybrid and caring responsibilities and what have you form a big overlap of that intersection, and many of the solutions are the same. But the great chapter in one of Desperat's books about the different mechanisms misogynists use to put us back in our place, which I would highly endorse and resonates with what you're saying, Jumin. Sharon, and then very quickly Michaela, and then I will return to our panelists for the final say.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you. This is my first LWN meeting. I've been a member for many years, but never had a meeting. I'm a councillor. I've been a councillor for 7 years. I've been the women. I'm the women's officer for the CLP. One of the things I want to bring up is your meetings online and what have you, your hybrid meetings. If you're having a meeting with women, I can't control any abuse what might be happening to the women. That is my biggest concern. You don't know if that a person is being abused, and they can't tell us, whereby coming to a group, they can sit down and tell you in confident, but it's very hard to do it while on a hybrid call. And that is one of my main concerns. Yes, I mean, hybrids are very handy. And I think when you're talking about hybrid meetings, more comes out when you're face to face than it does when you're on a meeting. I was mayor for 2 years and I had to do all the meetings by hybrid on the last year when the pandemic was on, and it was a total nightmare, believe you me. So, but my concern is for the abuse of women on a hybrid when they can't say what they want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon, and warm welcome to your first event. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, I think when LWN say hybrid, we don't really mean true hybrid. We mean a mix of opportunities for in-room safe spaces that you can create where absolutely, as you say, people can raise things where they can see and know who's in the room and trust that space a bit more than they can a virtual setting. But also these kind of virtual events where we can all dial in on an evening, you know, from the comfort or heat of our own respective spaces. And I can see we've got people on the call from more or less Land's End to John O'Groats.
You never know who's in the background. That's my concern.
No, indeed. So absolutely, I think creating a mix of different spaces and allowing different mechanisms for people to access it, and obviously for some people with disabilities, then hybrid, then virtual works great, and for others it is an additional barrier. So absolutely, we're encouraging people to come up with a calendar that is mixed and that works for everybody. Michaela.
Hi. I mean, I've been a Labour Party member for 50 years. I've been a trade unionist for over 50 years. And I've been a passionate feminist since the day I was born. I think it always ran in my blood. Now, I have been fighting all my life for women to be recognised for who we are. We are a powerhouse, an absolute powerhouse. We're the decision-making bodies. I mean, we're the decision-making bodies within our own homes, within our communities, within society, and even in our workplaces. But sometimes we don't even recognise that within ourselves, how powerful we are. And our society is built on women, and the work that women does. And this needs to be shouted from the rooftops. I'm a woman. I am proud to be a woman. We can make the decisions that matters throughout the lives of everyone. But I came across, I don't know if anybody else have come across it, CEDAW. It's a convention of the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. It's a United Nations treaty, and it's the only United Nations treaty specific to women. We ratified, the country, believe it or not, Margaret Thatcher actually ratified it in 1986. Now, if anybody, please have a quick look up on CEDAW. And because CEDAW have been ratified by this country, right, they're obligated to carry out all the functions and the general recommendations within CEDAW. Now, everything that have been spoke to tonight, right, is covered by CEDAW. And if CEDAW was transposed into domestic law, right, that would alleviate so much of what we've been speaking about tonight, whether that's representation in local government, representation in parliament, violence against women. It covers, low pay. It covers everything because it's substantive equality for all women. And that, you know, please look up on that, because I am part of CEDAW in law. It's a grassroots movement, and we have held 2 CEDAW People's Tribunals, which are very, very powerful in themselves. And I mean, we actually done that on Fresh Air, and we had a lot of pro bono legal work to accomplish this. And if you could just look at CEDAW in law and see what a grassroots movement, women's grassroots movement, can actually achieve. And like I say, you know, we're pushing forward for CEDAW to be domesticated into domestic law.
You're on mute, Claire.
Sorry, it's been a great tech night all around. Thank you very much, Michaela. I know you've put some information about CEDAW that people can read up on in their own time in the comments, so that was very valuable. Thank you. I have had a number of other messages in the comments from people who aren't in a position to send them out loud, some of which relate to Labour's complaints process and various specific situations within that. LWN can't sort of operate as caseworkers within the long glue pipeline of doom, but we can forward emails to senior people and attempt to get them to at least give you an update on where your complaint is up to. If that would be helpful, my email address is Claire, CLAIRE @lwn.org.uk. I cannot, I repeat, fix all of the complaints that are in the glue system, but I am very happy to just say oi by means of emailing the people whose jobs it is to make sure that happens. There was one specific thing as well that, however, I think people might have some knowledge and be able to support on, which was a complaint which related to having been attacked for menopause symptoms as part of a Labour group. So I'm going to call now on our remaining speakers to offer us just 1 minute's concluding thoughts each. So if any of you happen to have any knowledge of good practice of menopause support within local government, that would be most welcome, or if there's any of the other contributions you particularly wanted to pick up on. I can see we still got Anntoinette and Jen, and Sue, you're back from voting. Fabulous. So I will go to you in that order, if that's okay. Anntoinette.
Thank you, Claire. One of the speakers talked about standing and she didn't win. When I stood to be mayor, I was the only woman among 3 men and the only person of colour of 3 white men standing. So sometimes it isn't just about winning the race, it's about the journey you begin, and it encourages other women, because many women then said, actually, because I actually stood up, that they were encouraged to stand. So, it hurts for a while, but it's not the end of the world if you don't succeed that time. We've got some good practice on the work around menopause that we've just launched in our council, where we've worked with public health. So I would say, I'm happy to give that to Claire and we can circulate that after. What I would say to you as women is that you are all heard in this space, but it's really important that each of you go away feeling empowered and not powerless, because how we feel is valid, but what we do helps us to respond and overcome with what we're going through. And I'd say if it's possible for me, it's absolutely possible for you, because we are all phenomenal and capable in our own right. Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Anntoinette. A lovely note to almost end on. Jen.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you, everyone. I know that we've had a lot of questions, and I want to keep it positive, so I don't want to dwell on the negative at this point. But for the people that have messaged me about things specific, drop me an email and I will reply outside of the call. I think that one of the things that we really need to remember is what Claire was saying before about not kicking the ladder down after us. And I am very proud to say that within my council, I am not yet in a position of leadership. Give me time. I was only just elected to this council in May. Give me time. But I look at the sisters in this room and the other speakers, and I know none of them would kick that ladder out. I've met some women that do, and they break my heart sometimes, but I also have seen women in the council that I don't know very well, but I see them going through trouble. I see them being a victim. And usually the best thing that you can do is say, you know what? I think we can change it. The way that you are being victimized by someone else, we can change the structure to stop that. It might be hard and it'll take time, and we're probably going to fail once or twice, but I will do it with you. If you don't have the confidence to stand up and move it, I'll move it and you can second it. But we can do this together. And it's having the courage to approach your sisters that you see are being put down and say, I'm with you. Let's do this together. And you can make those changes little by little. Culture change. My career is inequalities. Culture change never comes fast. It's frustrating, but it makes you even more determined to celebrate those wins, because one little win will have an impact down the line. And it's when you see that very, very opinionated 8-year-old who stands up after hearing a hybrid meeting, and just after you click leave meeting, and she stands up and says, that man doesn't know how to chair. I bet I could do it. So other people are on the call, and sometimes they're our daughters. Something else to remember.
I love that, Jennifer. Thank you so much. And making change is often a marathon and not a sprint. And often it is our steadfastness, our persistence, our fastidiousness that are the things that we should be most proud of, for they will get us there. Sue, can I hand to you for our concluding comments?
Yeah, sorry, I kind of missed most of the questions, so I'm not really able to address those. But the good news is we won the vote. So there we go. No, I think the questions I did hear about was around the issues of abuse, unfortunately. And there are people who like to try and undermine women who want to get on in the public sphere, whatever level that's at. And I do think it's really important that we have that support network amongst ourselves, the Labour Women's Network, and also amongst, as I say, our local contacts within our local council, within Parliament here. We have a Labour Women's PLP, which is, again, very, very supportive of women in Parliament. And I think those networks are incredibly important. But having said that, I don't know a female MP who hasn't had a death threat. I had a number myself. I had the police around regularly. I have a panic button by my bed. I have a panic button by my front door. It costs a fortune, £15,000, to sort out each women politician's house to attempt to keep them safe. I actually really think that we need to, as a party, think more seriously about what we do to try and stop social media and actually allowing these people there in the first place. I really, really, really do, because it's actually quite difficult to stop them, and sometimes the police take it seriously, sometimes they don't. And I was a friend of Jo Cox's, and I know what the outcome can be. And I'm not sure we've really moved on. And I really think as a party, we have to do this. I have a friend who's a woman councillor. She was being threatened quite aggressively in her own home, having things thrown at her home. Nothing was done by the police. I know it's I don't want to end on a down note, but I do think as a party, a political party, we need to take this more seriously about how we protect our female politicians at whatever level they are. Having said that, I don't want to discourage anybody from putting yourselves forward. And that's the other side of it. I really worry that if we don't tackle it, women will be put off actually putting themselves forward to stand for public office. And that would be the worst outcome we could possibly have. But anyway, thanks very much for inviting me. And I'm really happy to help anybody who wants any support or information or anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sue, for that offer of help and support, as well as for all of your contributions. I mean, the difficult messages is why LWN exists. We can take those harsh fights off and have those in the room, so that we're not putting the burden onto every single current or would-be councillor or female politician or activist to do so. And we are proud to carry that mantle with all of your support. So we will take forward all of those concerns and suggestions forward, and some really helpful things in the chat. As Nadine there was saying about applying the 4 set recommendations for standing orders to try and run more feminist meetings. So much good stuff out there that can be pinched. And if you have not had enough of Labour Women's Network this month, we have another brilliant event coming up on Thursday the 29th, virtually again on misogyny in policing, with the brilliant Jess Phillips, Sarah Jones, and hopefully Belle Rivera-Addy joining us at that event too. We have training opportunities live now. There is just a couple more days left to apply for our next parliamentary training weekend in Birmingham. Or if you can't manage a whole weekend, on the 28th of this month, we have our next Understanding Labour's Selection Processes workshop. There are elections coming up to our executive committee. So if you have time and skills to give and want to help us run our organisation even better at this point at which we're potentially knocking on the door of a Labour government, please do put yourself forward for that. But most of all, please do, if you can, back our motion or find somebody who enjoys CLP or women's branch meetings who would benefit from doing so and putting that forward. Please amplify it on Twitter with a hashtag councils for this millennium, and please do keep supporting one another, amplifying one another's voices, and being the change that we want to see. Thank you to our amazing guests. Thank you to each of you for giving us your time tonight, and good night, sisters.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you.